You're listening to Stand Tall and Own It, the podcast for high-performing female leaders who are ready to make an impact by discovering the safety that comes from understanding their own value and exercising their own authority. I'm your host, Andrea Johnson, and I'm here to tell you it is time to just truly be you, my strong friend. It's time to stand tall and own it. Hi there, friends. Welcome to another episode of Stand Tall and Own It. I am your host, Andrea Johnson, and I am really excited to bring you my very first guest on this whole new iteration of the podcast. Courtney Elmer is, a founder and CEO of the EffortLESS Life. I don't know if that sounds good to you, but it sounds great to me. She also teaches people how to launch podcasts and get them in the top 100. Now, before you think, but I'm not a podcaster, that's okay. She didn't get there overnight. And what we talk about is her journey there. We talk a whole lot in this conversation about our voice and how it matters, how the words we use matter, how the beliefs that we have about ourselves actually come across in sound, and they affect how you sound to other people. She has this lovely, deep voice, and it's rich. And wait till you hear it. And she even mentions later on that early on in her podcasting, before she had these more solid beliefs about herself, her voice sounded a lot higher. So I'm thinking, I might need to work on that because I always feel like my voice sounds like a little kid. But either way, it was just a really authentic and beautiful conversation. Now, lest you think this is only for those who are in the entrepreneur space, please don't hit the pause button and don't eject. It is not. It is about growing in who you are as a person, as a leader, as a businesswoman, or as an entrepreneur. And I love the fact that she is just warm and wise and has some amazing stories to tell because she's been through a journey for sure. But what else I love about her is that she's also sassy. And as somebody who uses spunky as one of my words, sassy is a great one. I cannot wait for you to meet her. You're going to want to follow her and you're going to want to learn from her. Again, her name is Courtney Elmer. Meet my new friend, Courtney. Hey, Courtney, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, guess what? You are the first guest on my new podcast.
I feel so special. Like this is such an honor. I'm excited for our conversation today.
Me too. And if y'all aren't watching this on YouTube, she just did her own little happy dance. That was great. I knew we were going to get along. So before we get into kind of the meat of our conversation here, if you wouldn't mind, I think that the guests always do a better job introducing themselves than I do. And I don't want to read your bio. So maybe give us in a nutshell kind of who you are and what kind of leader you are and what you do and kind of set the stage for the conversation we're about to have.
Absolutely. So I am the CEO and founder of a company called the EffortLESS Life and the creator of PodLaunch. So what we do in a business sense or within the company is we actually help leaders launch podcasts as the vehicle, not only to drive traffic and sales to their business, but to use their voice to create their legacy. And that's what I am really all about. Because at 9 years old, my mom looked at me one day and she said, Courtney, your mouth is what gets you in trouble. Go to your room. And I can remember she was always punishing me for speaking up, speaking out. I was very sassy as a 9-year-old. And I was mouthing off to her about something. Couldn't tell you what it was. But I remember at that point in the conversation, it was the moment where my voice was getting louder and louder and louder because I was trying to be heard, make my message heard. And she was trying to teach me how to be respectful and how you're supposed to talk to people. And looking back now, I get that. But for whatever reason that day, I internalized that message. And somewhere in my brain, I decided that if I was going to be punished for speaking up, it wasn't worth speaking out at all. So for the next 20 plus years, I started to bend myself to fit what I thought the world wanted for me, what I thought my parents wanted for me, what I thought my friends wanted from me, my teachers. And I lost sight of who Courtney was in the process. So fast forward with me, it's 2 days after my honeymoon, sitting in the doctor's office for a follow-up visit from a sinus infection I had had a couple weeks prior. And my doctor sits down that day and she looks me in the eye and she says, Courtney, you have thyroid cancer. And she said, the good news here is that it's very treatable. She said, but the bad news for you is you've got this rare mutation that's very aggressive. We don't see it often. You're the youngest patient I've ever had. We need to operate quickly. So I've cleared a spot for you on my surgery schedule next week.
Oh, my word.
Pretty sure my jaw hit the floor. I'm like, what is
My
happening?
jaw's
I'm like,
hitting the floor.
2 days after my honeymoon.
I
Right.
know. I mean, I knew you had cancer. I just didn't know the full story. And
Yeah.
as someone who spent 11 years in the Johns Hopkins Cancer Center working in cancer research, it's like I worked with head and neck cancer. So this is all very, I'm like going, oh, I know the ramifications of all of this. Pardon me for interrupting, but I love the authenticity of this story. Keep going, please.
Yes. So I'm gripping my brand new husband's hand, right? The thought going through my mind, in sickness and in health, and sickness and in health. This is not quite how I saw this playing out. And fast forward, to make a very long story short, through surgery, through treatment, through recovery, the thing that I never forgot was what my doctor said to me that day. And she said, Courtney, one of the big risks of this surgery and the radiation is infertility. She said, but the other big risk is that you might not be able to speak again.
Mm-hmm.
Your vocal cords could easily be severed when I'm there removing your thyroid. She said, and the odds are that I'm very experienced at this. I don't want you to go crazy worrying, but I have to let you know the risks. And at that moment, it was so ironic because for someone who had silenced herself for 20 years, in an instant, I was terrified of losing my voice. So from that moment forward, not only was that the catalyst for me to enter the world of entrepreneurship and start my business, but it was also the moment from which I began to reclaim my voice. And am still in the process of reclaiming, because I believe it is very much a lifelong process for all of us. But that's when I really connected to what I believe I'm here on this earth to do, which is not only to use my voice in service of others and to bring about positive, meaningful change in the world, but to help other people do the same. So while the physical manifestation of that is us helping people launch top-ranked podcasts to really give their voice that vehicle that they need to express themselves and step into their full potential and become that in-demand thought leader, that's the deeper reason why I do.
Okay, I have to take a breath. It's so interesting when you connect with someone outside of their story and you just think this is a great person and we get along really well. And then you realize, oh my goodness, there's a reason, there's a depth to that person. And there's a reason that just like understanding everything that we experience is there, that we is not just our teacher, but we have to evaluate it and see what it is. This is a clear understanding of you being able to look at your circumstances and say, hang on, because we can hear your voice and it's beautiful. And so obviously nothing happened to it. I don't know if you struggled with it. I know a lot of thyroid cancer patients do struggle for a long time. But to know that your voice is fine and everything worked out and you just took that as, I'm just not taking this crud anymore, right? I'm not doing it. So was that the point when you said you launched your business? Over how many years was that you actually launched your business?
So I've been in business for about 7 years. Okay. And I wish that I could say that was the moment that my life turned around and it was a complete 180 and it's all been amazing ever since. No, it did not go that way. So right after the diagnosis, which this year I made 10 years cancer-free. So grateful.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I went back to corporate because I was afraid. I was so afraid. And so I started like this little side hustle thing, but I was never fully in. And I was kind of like 1 foot in corporate, 1 foot in my business. And it wasn't until a few years later that I'm like, all right, I'm all in. I'm all in. But I needed that little 2 to 3 year buffer, however long it wound up being, 2.5, 3 years, to just start to unearth and unpack a lot of the beliefs and the fears that I had that were holding me back, to where I could even get to a point to put both feet in the boat and go forward with the business. And
sure.
That was 7 years ago.
I mean, I love that you own up to the fact and that you needed that stability for a little while to figure out what you needed to do because we talked about this a little bit, and I'd like to dive a little deeper into that whole uncovering your own voice. This is one of the things that I talk about very much, is because I have now gone through what I would call a deconstruction reconstruction in my life. It has it's colored and flavored everything. But what I've noticed is that it's a little bit like a good forest fire. We're recording this right after the Maui fires. That's not a good kind of fire, but the good forest fire, that where the pine cones can open up and things can, you come back 3 weeks later and things are already sprouting green. I felt like that was kind of what needed to happen in my life. And I've noticed that being able to tear down things in one area to be able to find the solid core and to be able to build that back up to something that's beautiful and lasting is applicable everywhere in my life. It's applicable in the way I think about my weight, or the way I look, or my now almost completely gray and white hair, or even the fact that I'm an adoptive mother, because you said infertility was a possibility. And so I understand that struggle, but being able to say it applies to all these areas. But deconstructing and reconstructing is 100% about finding your own voice. And I think people lose that, especially when we're talking in the religious side, which is where mine started. So tell me a little bit about the process that you went through, kind of trying to discover your voice, because I was the kid that, I mean, my seventh grade science teacher threw, this is how old I am, at one of those regular erasers that from a chalkboard, like the big black kind that you bang it and the stuff goes flying everywhere, literally beamed one across the room at me because I just was not shutting up in seventh grade. Fortunately, it hit the chart with all the elemental chart instead of me. And my mother was called Motor Mouth, and my mother actually said one thing to me too, that she said, "Not everybody wants to hear your opinion, Andrea." And for me to come full circle and get to a place where I'm like, I know, but people turn on their podcast app to listen to my opinion. And, people come to, and when I was in corporate, fortunately, yours was only 3 or 4 years. Mine was 24. That's a little bit longer stint. I really tried to play by the rules, Courtney. People come to my office and talk to me and ask my opinion. So let's talk about the kind of a few of the steps that you went through and see how they match up. Because I know there are a lot of women listening who feel that same way, feel that they're not able to speak up. And if they get loud, then they're going to be told to be quiet. But then if they're quiet, then, oh, you're a wallflower, right? How do you deal with that, navigating that double bind?
Yeah, such a good question, and such a depth to that question. There's so many layers we could peel back.
Sorry, it
In
was
fact,
40 questions.
no, this is good. In fact, just this morning, I was reading a post that a colleague of mine had put out. And literally the first line was, "If you are not a white male, then in some ways you have likely been told to silence yourself."
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, yep, that is true.
Mm-hmm.
And so much of, here in the Western world or wherever you live in the world, culturally, we're taught to keep silent, not to speak up, not to express ourselves. You're too much.
Mm-hmm.
You're not enough. All of those messages. And you mentioned a word there that carries so much within it, and the word is opinion.
Mm.
And so often we give our power away to the opinions of others.
Yeah.
And I will never forget this. In the earlier days of my business, one of my very first business mentors, I was on a hot seat call with him. And I'm rambling on about some problem in my business. And he stops me midway and he just says, "Courtney, what's more important, someone's opinion of you or the work that you're here to do?"
Mm.
When it came out of left field and hit me like a ton of bricks, because I was like, okay, that's the root of the problem. You hit the nail on the head, right? And I kind of like sheepishly like went off camera after that, no. But it was one of those moments where you felt like your soul was bared open because someone saw you and saw what it was that was keeping you from being you. And I always say this, that, and for me in my journey, what I learned, and actually launching my podcast taught me this. It was a lesson that I didn't expect, because I created my podcast just to connect with people like you, people listening who I just wanted to get to know and have deeper connections with and be able to build that trust and go deeper on topics than I could in a, 200-word Instagram caption. But what it taught me was that when you take full ownership of your voice, you're able to step into the fullest expression of who you're meant to be. Because your voice, think about it, it's like a fingerprint. We're always looking, especially in the online space of business, entrepreneurship, leadership. If you're someone who wants to stand out and be heard and be recognized for something, well, How do we do that? And what a lot of people do is they'll borrow other people's words. They'll show up and do these lip sync reels, right? They'll let AI write the copy for them. But the thing that they're not doing is the thing that makes you stand out, which is speaking up and speaking what you believe, not what someone else says you should believe. There's a lot of layers there. We could go in any direction you want.
Oh, and we probably will, girl.
Yes. I know. I love picking this stuff apart. You know, it's so deep. But for me, with my own journey, I had a voice coach along the way who, because of my background in psychology and because of all the work that I've done in the coaching space on my own beliefs, helping my clients with their beliefs, all those things that limit us, I knew I wanted to do this work on my voice, because your beliefs also influence the intonation and inflection in your voice, which also influences how other people receive your voice. You know, if you've ever been on, let's say, a webinar, and the person is there and they're teaching and they're engaging and they're talking in the chat and they're saying, teaching you all this valuable stuff, and then they switch to the pitch, and then all of a sudden it's like this weird energy, and you're like, what just happened?
They become a robot, or it's weird.
It's palpable, or they start talking faster and faster to get through the end because they're trying to get through it. So our beliefs actually drive our voice, the sound of our voice, and the way that sound is received. So there's a book that I'm going to recommend that everyone read. Okay. It is called Hidden Messages in Water. This is a book by a Japanese scientist called Masaru Emoto, is his name.
Okay.
And one day he got the idea. He said, you know, if our voice brings about a certain energy, you know, we speak something positive into the world and you receive that, we all know how good it feels to be affirmed. You know, we speak something negative or harsh. You know, my son will call me out, Mom, we do not speak with a firm voice in this family. You know, whenever my voice takes on that tone, he hears it. He calls me out on it.
Mine just says, don't yell.
Don't yell. So that we receive that negative, quote unquote, negative energy through tonality. So he got this idea one day, kind of far out, kind of crazy. And he's like, I wonder if water can receive this energy and reflect it back to us. You know, water's a reflector. You look in a pool, you see your reflection, right? Water can reflect. So what he did was, and this is going to sound totally wild and crazy, but wait till I tell you what happened after he did this. Okay. So he wrote down on a sheet of paper, he wrote the words love and gratitude, and he taped it around a glass bottle that had water in it. Then he had a second glass bottle and he wrote the words, you fool, and he taped it around that bottle. Then what he did was he took a sample of each of those bottles from the water, he froze it, and then using some really fancy, very zoomed in camera lenses, he took pictures of the ice crystals that were formed. And you can Google this. You can look up Hidden Messages in Water, Masaru Emoto, and click images and see what he saw. And in the words, the water with the words that had been shown the words love and gratitude, it was the most beautiful, intricate, perfect ice crystal you've ever seen, like a snowflake. Beautiful and rich and deep. And then when you looked at the one that took the sample of the water with the word you fool, no ice crystal formed at all. It couldn't even form. So then he was like, okay, this is kind of weird. He's like, am I making this up? What is this? So
I have goofies.
Right? This experiment turned into his career, which spanned many decades, where he did all kinds of experiments with water, with like, you know, exposing water to different types of music, heavy metal music versus like Chopin, and what that looked like. And exposing water to microwave radiation versus, you know, purified straight out of a stream in the ground, and what that looked like. Spoken words. He would take water into classrooms and he would have the students say, you know, you're cute over the water. And they would try it, you know, and they'd say it a couple times, and that water had like a few little crystals that formed. And then they would do it a bunch of times and it would have a more complete crystal that formed. So in this book, he walks through his research process and what this looks like and how it manifested. But what I love about it, and what he really gets to the heart of, is the power of the energy of our words. And the energy that we put out into the world and that we receive through our words, through our voice. And the physical manifestation where it wasn't just suddenly this thing where like, yeah, okay, we put energy out. That's a little weird and woo-woo is pseudoscientific, it's not real science, right? Energy, all this. But he made it tangible and he was like, you can see it now.
Mm.
And this is the power of that. And so to me, when I think about our voice, and my voice coach used to say this all the time, she was like, Courtney, your voice is the orchestra of your heart.
Mm.
It's the expression of your soul. It is who you are. And I'm talking about your true voice, not the voice that you've learned to speak with because of the beliefs in your mind about how you should speak or how you should show up. And if you go back and look at old videos or even listen to old podcast episodes of mine, I always say, I'm like, please don't do that. But if you were to do that, you would notice my voice is a good like 5 decibels, 6 decibels higher than you hear right now. And it was much more polished and like almost as if I was keeping you out because there was just some bulletproof glass that I'm like, I'm putting on this image because I want you to like me. And I want to say things in such a way that makes you believe that I'm an expert. When at the end of the day, Courtney was totally missing from that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget, I'm born and raised right outside of New Orleans, Louisiana. So little Southern Belle through
I
and
have
through.
family down there. My family's all from the Golden Triangle and in Southeast Texas. So
Oh,
I'm
love it.
very familiar with the bayou down there.
Yes. So I've never been one to have a thick Southern accent, but there are certain words that I say where you can catch up, you can hear a little twang.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be where that was non-existent. And I remember with the group that I was doing this voice work with, and there were moments where I would start to share my story or start to open up, and like the real Courtney started poking through, and they were like, "Are you from the South?" That before in your voice. Where has that been? Right. And it was like so authentic.
Mm-hmm.
People can connect with that. So I know I went on a very long tangent there about the power of our voice, but this fires me up because it is so important for us as leaders to realize how much power you have in the voice that you have.
Well, and I think it's important to recognize that it is both the mental and psychological voice as well as the physical voice. Here I am. Okay, I'm going to talk lower. But do you understand what I'm saying? I think that's what you're getting at. That we are, and when I coach, I talk to women about this all the time. You're not one dimensional, you're not 2 dimensional, and you're not even 3 dimensional. You're like 4 and 5 dimensional because we have a spirit, we have a mind, we have a body, we have a soul, we have all of these things make us who we are. And if you just work on one area, that's not enough.
Right.
And if you only present one side of you to the world, that's not enough. And it's not just that they need to see more sides, you need for others to see more sides, right? So I love this, going deep into that understanding of discovering your own voice, because I think as little children, we have it. It's there. When I talk about, and I'd love to talk about core values as well, but when I talk to people about core values, and my top one is freedom, and people automatically, as an American, they think, oh, well, that means you're like apple pie and, all this stuff. No, that's not what it means. It means don't tell me what to think. And so it's like freedom of thought. And I was the kid. It's like, you're not the boss of me. And it wasn't so much that I didn't want to do things that pleased. It was, I want the ability and the ownership and the sovereignty, I guess if we could use that word, to make my own choices. And so even nearly 30 years into marriage, my husband has to remember that if he starts a sentence with, wouldn't you agree that? I'm like, no, that's not what we do. And he's like, oh, that's right. What do you think about? I'm like, perfect. And when we can discover our own voice, that gives us the ability to figure out those things like core values. And, that's kind of my main message. That's where I've discovered. I started out with intentional optimism, working from the outside in like we do. You started with working with systems and all that, now you're down to the voice, and we'll talk about that in a sec. But can we talk a second about core values? Because I know that you used to teach them as well. And maybe you could share how your core values have affected or maybe aided you in figuring out what your voice truly is.
Yeah. One of my all-time top core values is connection.
Mm.
Always has been. Took me a while to realize it. But that is the thing that I, as a child, was always seeking and
Mm-hmm.
didn't always get. And now looking back, you can always look back as an adult and see, like, oh, I get it. My parents were tired. My mom worked the night shift. She slept during the day. I had two siblings who were 18 months apart, but also 6 years younger than me. So she was raising a toddler and a newborn, at the same time, while also trying to manage a sassy 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old.
Mm,
And seeing that now, I'm like, oh, I get it. She didn't have the availability to give
mm,
me the connection that I was looking for in the way that I needed it. For a long time, though, I was resentful of that. I was bitter about that. So I sought that connection in other ways, in a lot of unhealthy ways too. And unhealthy in the sense that I was seeking it not, in a spiritual way. I'm a Christian.
mm-hmm.
I believe in God, not seeking it from Him. Like, okay, this
Mm-hmm.
is, you've already got your worth there, Courtney. It's
Mm-hmm.
fine. You're good, right? Not seeking in that way, but seeking it from other people around me,
Mm-hmm.
seeking it through my accomplishments, the
Mm,
car I was driving, the amount of money I had in the bank, the type of clothes and bags and shoes that I had in my closet, and seeking it that way. And at the end of the day, as I, have walked this journey, many ups and downs, many dark moments, and through many dark valleys, realized that that was at the core of it, was connection,
mm.
because that's really what I was looking for. And also related to that, one day this dawned on me that on the other side of that spectrum for me is rejection,
Sure.
which is why I feared rejection so much and why I
Mm-hmm.
was so afraid to put myself out there and to say what I thought
Mm,
and not what I thought someone wanted to hear from me.
mm-hmm. Or what wasn't going to get you in trouble.
Exactly. Exactly. So that drives my business. It drives the work that I do. And, when I sit down on a discovery call with a potential client, I first they were like 30 minutes and they were like 45 minutes. Now I'm like, just block off a full hour because we're going to be here. We're going to buckle in. And this is going to be the best, most mind blowing coaching conversation you've ever had. Right. By the end, they're like, oh my gosh, can we work together?
Yeah.
But it's one of those things because that's me. That's who Courtney is.
Mm-hmm.
Courtney's the connector.
Yeah.
And I've seen this play out and manifest, in my life and also with my voice, which is what I seek to do when I have conversations like this. That's why I
Mm-hmm.
love podcasting so much. I love being interviewed. I love interviewing others, hearing their story, because I love to connect.
Mm.
So it's very much a driver of all that I do.
Well, and I think that's really nice to see how it touches everything and it helped you uncover and discover your voice. But let's also talk about I've just come through a business metamorphosis myself, a rebranding and kind of narrowing down of a niche. And this is kind of normal for entrepreneurs. And I want anybody out there listening or watching, it's not we're not the only people who go through this, right? We all kind of figure out how we want to lead, how we want to serve, how we want to show up in the world. But I'm curious to know how understanding in your voice and understanding your own need for connection, how that manifested itself in your business metamorphosis, because that's something that I think people need to see is that if for some reason you are someone who's interested in entrepreneurship, you need to see that most of us don't just set out and that's just the thing. We're really good
Right.
from the
Not at
beginning.
all. I wish it went that way. But then sometimes I don't wish it went that way because I wouldn't have all the lessons and the ahas and
Right,
the
right,
learning and the
right.
growth, right? And all the
Sure.
things. So starting out, when I opened my business, and you're going to laugh at this, but it was literally Courtney Elmer Coaching.
Why
That
would
was it.
I laugh?
That's what
I
I did.
couldn't do that. Mine was already taken. Andrea
Uh,
Johnson is too common. That's what they
I
tell us to
laughed.
do.
I laughed because it was like, what does that even mean? Who is Courtney Elmer? What does she teach? What is she coaching on? Right. It was as general and generic as you could get. And I didn't want to be a personal brand. This is really important
Mm,
because for me, and this kind of goes back to growing up with a dad who was an entrepreneur, he's in the finance space. And I learned a lot about entrepreneurship through my dad, the good parts and the bad, the
mm,
high points and the lows. And I lived that. I lived that. And so for me, I knew kind of from a logical business perspective, oh no, I want to build a company that exists outside of me. Not that I ever planned to sell, but if I did, I want the business to have value and not to have value in Courtney.
mm-hmm.
Well, at the time, this was kind of prior to the whole explosion of like online coaches and courses and things that we've seen in recent years, especially since COVID. So this is pre all of that. And there were a few well-known names in the industry, Amy Porterfield,
Mm-hmm.
Jenna Kutcher, a few names that, those in the entrepreneurial space would recognize.
Right.
And they were all personal brands.
Right.
So what did we see popping up? We saw lots of personal brands popping up. So I would hire mentors to help me build my business. I had peers and colleagues who I would talk with about my business. They were all building personal brands.
Mm.
And they advised me to build a personal brand. They're like, Courtney, your brand is nothing without you. You are the brand. You are the like. And I was so in my head about this, Andrea. It was crazy because I was like, this is not the business that I want to build, but it's the one that everyone's telling me I should build to be successful. So therefore, I'm going to follow what they're telling me to do and not do it the way that I believe I need to do it for myself, and hopefully have the same success that they're having. Well, long story short, I did not have that same success. It took me for 5 years to even pass the 6-figure mark. And I'm telling you, working my butt off. And I share that because for a lot of people, they think you open your business, you put up your website, you put your course out there, maybe you teach a webinar, you launch a podcast or something, and then whoop, whoop, 0 to 6 figures, in 9 months or 12 months or,
that would be awesome.
That would be awesome.
There'd be a whole lot more out here doing it.
Yes, it really would. And so for me, my business took a lot of twists and turns. I feel as though the best way to describe this is those twists and turns were on other people's paths. Courtney, You're so good at systems. You're so good at organization. Oh my gosh, the detail. You have such an attention to detail. You should be teaching systems. You should be teaching online funnels. You should be teaching how to set all of this up and automations and all these things, which I was good at. But if you've ever read that book, The Big Leap, A. Hendricks, who was an incredible man, by the way. I had him on the podcast. It's about 6 months ago or so. It's genuine as they come. And he's explaining the difference between, your zone of excellence and your zone of genius. And I was living in that zone of excellence and I was doing well. I wasn't living in my zone of genius. So there was always an emptiness there. There was always something that I was chasing that I couldn't achieve through my business.
Right.
And so this is when really about what month are we in? 13 months ago. I'm doing the math in my head. But I feel like after COVID, like I've lost all sense of time.
It means nothing. I know.
It means absolutely nothing. So this was early last summer that I went through a period of darkness in my business that lasted a full year. And when I say darkness, it was that moment in the cocoon where you're like, I don't know if I'm ever getting out of here. I don't know what's on the other side of this. It reminds me of a book that we read to our son about the seed who was afraid to be planted. And there was this seed and he lived in a drawer and he had a happy life in the drawer with the other seeds. And one day the farmer's hand reached in and it grabbed him. And suddenly he was thrown into this dark hole and like the dirt was piled on top of him and he couldn't see anything and he was alone and he was afraid. But then suddenly he started to feel a change and a shift. Something new started to come up, right? And he became a sprout and then he sprouted into this beautiful tree and it had this whole legacy and it's a really beautiful story. That's how I felt. And my podcast is called Anti-Fragile Entrepreneurship. One of our core messages or pillars that our whole company stands on is this idea of anti-fragility, which simply means to grow through what you go through, to grow through those dark seasons. But I would also be lying if I didn't tell you that in that dark season, I wanted to quit. I questioned everything. I questioned, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I supposed to continue on this path? Should I pivot? Should I stop altogether? Should I do something else? Should I just be a mom for a while and just enjoy this time with my son? He's little. Do I just need to stop and pick this up down the road? I mean, every angle, I examined it and over-examined it. But I stayed the course because I knew, teaching what I teach and knowing what I know, having gone through some really dark seasons in my own life, that that's the only way to move through the valley.
Yeah.
Is to keep moving. A lot of people stop. And they stop without realizing it and they stay in the darkness. Now, you might not be moving very fast and there might be no light at the end of that tunnel and you're like, okay, I'm moving, but when?
I
When
know.
do I get through this valley, right?
Feeling my way.
Yes. But that was me for the better part of a year until, much like you with your business, it was almost like you had to take everything apart to put it back together. And
Mm,
this year has been the year of putting it all back together.
mm,
And so I've got a lot of people in my inbox lately like, okay, I have this program. You were going to join this program. You were going to do this thing. You were going to do this thing. And I'm like, not now.
mm,
I'm rebuilding right now. But before we can begin to sprout and to grow and to put down those roots, we have to go through that period of dormancy. And it's going to look like nothing's happening.
mm,
And for a long time, I felt a lot of shame around that because in this online world where you're very visible, it's like, well, what happens if I'm not visible? I still released podcast episodes every week, but I wasn't on social media. I wasn't emailing my list every week and doing all the things that I had done before. And that was embarrassing. That was
mm,
hard.
mm,
But I stayed the course. And now, having reconnected with what I know to be my deeper purpose, it's really put my business in a whole new light to where now I'm building it for me in alignment with my values, in alignment with what I want for myself and for my family, and not what someone else is telling me I need to or should be doing. This doesn't mean I don't have coaches or mentors, but I don't just blindly follow now like I used to.
and I'm sitting over here just a clapping, saying, "Yeah, do that." Because when Courtney, one of the things I talk about is we have no impact if we're living by somebody else's values, somebody else's strategy, somebody else's ideal for what we are supposed to be. And we are created individually, we are created uniquely, we are created with God's thumbprint on I mean, it's just like the beauty of the individuality. And yet we are all, just like you crave it, we are all created for connection. And we have to do these things in ways that honor who we were created to be. Otherwise, it's just going through the motions, right? And you could skate along all your life, but if you don't actually, because nobody really enjoys doing work, nobody enjoys doing even having their own business that feels like it has no value, or they don't make a difference. I've been in very large teams and very small teams, and now I'm an entrepreneur. And I can tell you, when I get into a time when I'm doing work that I feel like, why am I doing this? And then I realize, because I'm focusing on something else. What is wrong with me? I'm not that person. I don't want to do that. And yes, of course, in entrepreneurship, there's times when we have to do things to pay the bills or whatever and to build our skills. But I love that you're saying no to things. I love that you're saying, this is who I am and this is what I want to do. And it just really, because as we do that, it's one more example out there for the rest of us to follow, for the rest of us to say, that's what I want. I want that fulfillment. I want knowing that when I get up in the morning and I do my work, that I've done something that matters,
Yeah.
even if it only matters to me.
Right. Right. I'm
Because
so
I'm
glad
worth
you
it.
bring this up. It brings to mind a book that I read recently. I say recently. Again, time is like, this was probably a year ago that I read this book. But Martin Seligman, and he is one of the fathers, or the father of positive psychology.
Yeah.
And I've studied him both in my psychology work and outside of my psychology work because I just find it fascinating. And, I don't really know many people who like to sit there and read through these really boring psychology texts, but I'm one of them. But I'll distill down what he's shared in this book and save you the time of having to sift through it. And he was talking about authentic happiness. What does
Mm-hmm.
that look like? But from a scientific perspective, how can we measure that? And one of the things he shared this story in the book, a few stories, but this one in particular, where he had met someone who was an orderly at a hospital. And this orderly would go into the patient's rooms and he would just kind of like arrange the room as he thought the patient might enjoy it. He would take down kind of the sterile hospital pictures on the wall and get some pictures from the family of who the patient was and
Hmm.
put those up on the wall instead. And he just found such joy in this work. And so Martin interviewed him and they're having this conversation. And Martin's like, well, there's a lot of things in the world you could be doing. Why this? Why your job? And he said, and I'm going to parse his words. I don't remember exactly how he put this, but it was something to the effect of, because if I can make that patient just a little more comfortable as they're nearing the end of their time here on earth and let them know that they have value, that they're seen, that they have dignity, that brings me great joy. And so, in this scientific examination of what that looks like, and the whole point of this chapter in the book was that you can find meaning in anything that you do. But there are also times in our lives where we find ourselves working in a job that does not give us that meaning.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to separate, the job or the title from the meaning we think we're going to get.
Mm.
And instead really examine, which I feel like you do this so much with your clients. I can imagine y'all sitting here and having these deep conversations about, like, what is it that you value, that you want? If you're on your deathbed and you're looking back, what do you want to be remembered for?
Mm.
And if it's not what you're doing right now, maybe it is time to contemplate what it would look like to make a change. I'm not saying wake up tomorrow and make a change, but think about it. Start thinking about it. Start entertaining that. And I just found so much inspiration in that story, because it was like, here's this guy, this orderly at a hospital. He's cleaning bedpans. He's not got the best job in the world, but yet he had so much joy in his work because it was meaningful for him.
Yeah. And, a lot of times, Courtney, we bring the meaning. Brendan Burchard talks about, we bring the joy. And so we bring the meaning to what we do. And it doesn't always mean just because we find out what brings or what would be meaningful to us, or how we can have our core values honored, or we can find our voice. It doesn't mean that we have to necessarily change our job, but for sure, we need to change.
Yes.
For sure. Almost every single time. Before we wrap up today, I mentioned a little earlier, I talk about and help people work through their assumptions, their beliefs, and their conditioning. And we did mention that and touch on it just a bit. But I would love to know, for you, was there one category? You talk a lot about limiting beliefs, but is there an assumption or a belief or a specific type of conditioning that you found you really had to overcome to be able to get where you are today?
Yes. So going back to my voice story, where my mom would say, your voice gets you in trouble, your mouth gets you in trouble. One day she even slapped me across the face and said, shut up.
Oh.
And she had never laid a hand on me before, but that day I really got her feathers ruffled. I don't remember what it was about. And that was the only time it ever happened.
Mine chased me around at 17 with a bar of soap and finally got it in my mouth. So I fully understand.
Yes. It was the only time that she ever laid a hand on me like that. But it was the day that I was like, wow, what I have to say is not as important as what someone else has to say. I didn't realize that that was a belief or an assumption that I had made, right? I think it was wired into belief that my voice doesn't matter. If I use my voice, I won't be loved, right? That was the belief. But the assumption was what I have to say is not as important as what someone else has to say. And that drove the bus for a long time.
Yeah.
And it was only recently, Andrea, that was brought up and brought to light. And so now I remind myself, especially before doing interviews like this, or anytime that I'm speaking and using my voice or writing an email, right? It doesn't have to be physically speaking, but the expression through words of your voice, is that what I have to say is equally important as what someone else has to say.
Absolutely.
And living in that truth, and not the belief or the assumption that, well, someone else, their voice matters more.
Oh, that's a good one. And I think there's a lot of women that will very much relate to that, because there are quite a few of us out there that have sassy mouths. And
I'm taking full ownership of it now.
I know,
You better believe it.
There's a certain amount of, I don't know, it's beauty that comes with a little bit of age. You go around the sun a certain amount of times and you're like, you know what? can just be sassy. It's okay. And one of the
Right.
words I use to describe myself now is spunky. It just sounds a little bit nicer than sassy. So I just own it. That's just who I am. This has been delightful. I knew it would be. And I'm very grateful to you and the wisdom that you bring and the way you work with people like me, especially other podcasters. So for sure, where can people find you? What is if they want to, I know I'm subscribed to your podcast. So tell us a little bit more about your podcast and how they can subscribe or where the best place is to find you.
Yes. So as I mentioned a moment ago, anti-fragile entrepreneurship. Doesn't matter what app you listen to your podcast on, type that in or type in my name, it'll pop up. What I love about this show, which we've rebranded twice now, which has been interesting part of the journey too, right? We've rebranded it, but now I'm like, oh, I found my home. This is it. But what we discuss on this show is a lot about taking ownership of your voice, but that's not the full focus. The main focus is about how do we fail better? Because
Mm,
there's a lot of shows out there about leadership and entrepreneurship that are talking about success and what we need to do to be successful.
mm,
And we can buy into all those other people's opinions, right? About what we need to do. But at
right.
the end of the day, it's not about that. And your journey of success, you're not going to find that success until you learn how to better navigate the failure, the low points, those valleys in your life. So we
Absolutely.
talk about that anti-fragility, but also how to apply that, practically speaking, to be able to grow through those dark moments
Mm,
and take the lessons with you. Not whitewashing it and saying, oh, it's toxic positivity. This is all going to be great. Just keep going and it's going to be wonderful. No, owning every ugly, raw aspect of what that looks like
yeah.
for you, the good and the bad,
Yeah.
and embracing it. So that's the podcast. Come
Okay.
check it out. Love to have you. And then if you're listening right now and you have a podcast or you've been toying with the idea of launching one, maybe you've been thinking of launching one and you're like, yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna have the time to keep up with that. It seems like a lot of work. What if I run out of things to talk about, right? If that's you, or if you're the person who has a podcast, but you haven't crossed that 1,000 download per episode milestone and you want to grow that so that you can reach a global audience with your message and better leverage that platform to get your voice out there, to use your voice. I teach a workshop every couple of weeks. It's a live workshop on how to leverage a podcast, not only by getting it in the top 100 on Apple and on the podcast players, but how to use it as a platform for positive change in the world. And so this workshop is kind of unlike all the other webinars you've probably attended in the past. This is not like me teaching for 10 minutes and then pitching you for 50. This
Mm-hmm.
is straight up value. I literally walk you through our exact framework that we've used to help over 4 dozen coaches and consultants launch top ranked podcasts.
Mm,
And there's no pitch. At the end, if you want to learn how to work with me, I'll give you an invite to do that and show you how to do that. But this is just 90 minutes of value. And we keep them pretty intimate on purpose. They fill up when we send, I swear to you, I will send out one email and they fill up overnight.
mm,
Run ads to these. I mean, we're going to start running some ads, but I'm like, I don't even do that. And it's like, that's how much of a demand. And it just shows me that there are people out there who want to be heard.
mm-hmm.
And I love that. And I want to help them. That's what I'm here to do. So if you're interested in that, go to antifragileentrpreneurship.co
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
/workshop. And you can get all the details about the date and the time for the next one that we have coming up, as well as save your seat.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to it myself.
Awesome. Can't wait to have you.
And when you say that, it's like there's over 3 million podcasts out there, right? So it doesn't mean that they all get a lot of downloads, but I'm not hitting 1,000 downloads. I mean, I have lots of feedback and lots of really positive feedback, but I'm not hitting 1,000 downloads yet. So for y'all listening, I'll be in that next podcast if I can hit the button fast enough. Because if they go
Yes.
really fast, I'll just have
I
to get
know.
on the
And
waiting
I don't
list.
say that to create some kind of false sense of urgency. I say that because that's the truth. I have been floored every time we send out an email. In fact, this week's email, I was debating to even send it because it was already full just from word of mouth and, me doing things like this on the podcast, sharing it, places like
Mm,
that. So I sent out an email. I'm like, okay, I'm opening up a few more spots, but like jump on them because, I want to be able to get to everyone's questions at the end. That's the fun part where it's like, you get some FaceTime with me and we can actually talk about your business and your goals and, what you're looking to achieve with the podcast. And are you ready for a podcast that can bring you those things? Is your business ready for that influx of leads and traffic?
yeah. Well, and that's why I started a podcast because somebody I was listening to said, "Is this your next stage?" And I'm like, Yes. How did you know? And now she's my coach. So she's my
Amazing.
speaking coach. So, it's to be able to say, there's ways that we can all express our voice that may not have anything to do with becoming an entrepreneur. I started my podcast long before I was an entrepreneur. So I think this is great. And it's very generous. And I love how just your value of understanding your voice and helping others do that is making it so that you're just giving this away as a generous 90 minutes of your time. So thank you. This has been great. Is there anything we left out that you'd like to share or that we should know?
I want to circle back to my Japanese friend, who I respect and admire so much for this crazy, wild, but amazing experiment that he did.
Okay.
And how love and gratitude were the two things that he talked about being the most powerful ways that we can bring about change in the world. Because when we can express love and when we can express gratitude, he would do a much better job of explaining what actually happens on an energetic molecular level when we're expressing that. But the nutshell is that it can create a ripple that actually touches not just the people around you,
yeah,
but the people beyond them. And when I think about this purely from just a cosmic level, if you will, we're all created with a purpose. We're all put on this earth for some reason. And when we go through life, and I look at life in general almost as a valley, there's lots of little ups and downs along the way. But based on my belief system, our eternal reward is at the end. And we have to go through that valley to get there. And so when we can fully express ourselves to the degree that we can in this life, on this plane that we live in, on this earth, if you want to achieve these higher levels of consciousness, of awareness, of expression, of connection with yourself and with who you're made to be, that's how we do it. We access it through love and through gratitude. And I know there's a lot of people out there who say, oh, gratitude journal and do all of this. And I'm not talking about just like, adding another thing to your to-do list and writing down 5 things you're grateful for every night. But I'm talking about reflecting, bringing it back to where we started this conversation, reflecting on the moments in your life that you are deeply grateful for and tuning in and really just feeling what that gratitude feels like. I promise you that if you do that for 5 minutes a day, you will change. You can't not change. The times that I have done that, it resets the course of my day and I'm able to show up more authentically as me. And not as the version of me that was just upset by the email that I got or, the thing that happened this morning and the traffic on the way to school, whatever. But it's just tapping in and tapping into that just a little bit higher state of consciousness where we can then reflect that love and gratitude back out to the world. So powerful.
Good stuff. What a great way to end. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This has been awesome.
Good.